For session three of the November 2024 widening training, journalist Adriana Perez says that after several years as a trending news reporter, she was close to burnout before she had the opportunity to pivot toward a new chapter in her career. Today, Adriana is a general assignment and environment reporter at the Chicago Tribune, where she started as a breaking news intern in the summer of 2022 after graduating from the University of Notre Dame. About a year ago, Adriana began covering the environment almost exclusively, writing about the Great Lakes, climate change, environmental justice, agriculture, wildlife, and everything else in between, with a special focus on Chicago and the Midwest. Adriana, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you reaching out to me, and I feel honored to be speaking here today.
So I know that you've prepared a bit of a slide presentation for us, but before we get to that, I enjoyed getting to know you in our prep call and learning about your background and your approach to this specific topic. So why don't we start, as I often like to do, to give the journalists insight into your lived experience. So tell us a little bit about your background and how you entered journalism.
For sure. So, well, hello everyone. Again, my name is Adriana. And Rachel, please steer me back to keep it short if I'm kind of speaking too long. But well, I grew up in Ecuador, and my family there, well, my dad there is very involved in the newspaper industry. So I grew up having a lot of respect for journalism. But when I went to college, it's not really what I wanted to do. I didn't want to just blindly follow what folks in my family had done for generations. And so I started studying psychology actually first. And then the opportunity to take classes in a journalism minor came up, and I decided to just give it a try and see if I liked it on my own terms, right? If I really enjoyed it, or if it was just something that I thought I had to do. Took that first class and I really enjoyed it. It was very focused on current events. Obviously, like my first homework was to read the front page of the New York Times, and we had to do that every day before class. And I thought that was a very unique approach to classes in academics, right? That I really didn't see a lot in my other courses. So after that first semester taking journalism classes my sophomore year, during Christmas break, I had, I don't know exactly what sort of prompted it, but I had a moment of realization that the climate crisis was going to be defining for our generations. And it became a really existential question for me. So I started thinking about possibly doing something related to sustainability, but I didn't really know what that would look like. I was thinking science, activism, but none of it really resonated with me. And then I'll actually get back to this later, but I ended up going into journalism. I didn't really know how long I would stay in journalism, but I was lucky enough to get an internship at the Chicago Tribune after graduating in 2022 from Notre Dame, like Rachel said. And it was a 6-month internship, which was a little bit longer than most summer internships, which is sort of what caught my eye. And obviously it was breaking news. I remember my introductory conversations to other people in the newsroom. A lot of people would ask me, what do you see yourself doing in 5 years? And very honestly, I would say, I don't know. I'm not sure if I'll still be in journalism. I'm just really happy to be here in the first place, right? But I do remember a few times, I did bring up, maybe I would like to be doing environment journalism, right? It's something that I've always cared about, the environment, but I also really enjoy doing journalism. So I did breaking news for all my internship, and I got hired around October. 2022. And it was the same job. Like I kept doing the same kind of reporting. So it was a lot of crime reporting, a lot of tough issues, right? And there were fun like human feature stories as well. But I think at one point, like a few months into the full-time job, I started getting really burnt out. I was really the job was getting to me, right? It was really sad, and there was a really bad week where my team and I had to cover a few like high-profile and tragic deaths. So a Chicago police officer was killed. It's at her home, and then like a firefighter's family died in a fire. It was just a really, really upsetting week for my team and I think it just really got to me, and I was so close to just giving it up, right? Because I didn't know if it was the kind of journalism that I really wanted to be doing. And then I'm really glad I didn't give up. I decided to hold on just a little bit more. I was really grateful to my team because I really felt like we could rely on each other. My editor was just great. She always has prioritized our mental well-being too. And I think I just really felt really supported. And I thought that was something that was very unique and maybe something I wouldn't be lucky to have in other newsrooms or workplaces in another industry, for example. So I held on for a little bit longer. And then a few months later, about a year ago in June, well, a year and a half ago now, in June of last year, my editor and the environment editor had talked, and they offered me a chance to do environment reporting almost exclusively because I had sort of expressed interest and I had helped with a few stories here and there before. And honestly, I'm so glad, like I said, I held on because I think I have really found my niche in this industry and something that I really love writing about, learning about, and sharing. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be telling these stories. So I think that's it.
That is such an incredible story for this moment in time, because I think your key message of hang on and hang in.
Yeah.
If it's what you feel that you want to do or supposed to be doing, etc., that ability to just hunker down,
Hmm.
but also to stay open to
Hmm.
opportunities. So thank you for starting us off on that. I'm going to turn it over to you now and to your presentation.
Yeah. Thank you. So I should be able to. I haven't done this in a while, so I
Sid will walk you through
would
it.
Let me know if you
appreciate.
need any assistance.
Thank you. Does that work? Can you all see it?
Yes. And then
Okay.
if you click slideshow at the top.
Oh, perfect. Okay. And I can
Yep.
still see you guys, which is great. That's what I wanted to make sure I could still see you. Okay. Um, awesome. So here's a little presentation I put together. I didn't really know what to call this conversation, but that, after last week, I think this is something Rachel and I were talking about before we started, it feels like a very important moment in the country's history, but also in journalism, right? I put climate in parentheses because it does feel like a important moment for climate journalism, which is what I focus on, but also journalism in general. So I want to share a little bit about, and I'll talk a little bit about how my journey has sort of been shaped by these views of how to use journalism as a tool to kind of address this crisis of climate change, right? And I hope that some of this resonates with you all. I am by no means a veteran reporter. I have been doing this a few years, and environment reporting only 1 year, and a little bit more. And I feel like I have still so much to learn, but it's incredible that I feel like I've already learned so much that just makes me really excited for, the rest of my professional career. So hopefully, even if you're not necessarily interested in environment journalism or climate journalism, hopefully you can glean something from this because I really think that a lot of these things are interconnected. So basically a tipping point, I would try to be clever here too. A tipping point in climate science basically is a threshold that can be exceeded even by a small change that or a small action that can lead to significant change, right? So once you, for example, once you exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius of temperature in global warming, that will cause irreversible change in the global systems, right? So that's an example, but I've just been thinking about how like journalism, how we approach journalism in the next few years is going to be it's going to really set the pace for journalism and its future. So the way that each individual journalist decides to approach it, I think is really, it's going to be really important. So, okay, so I was telling you about how my sophomore year of college, I had this relation sort of about the climate crisis and how I really wanted to my life to kind of address that, right? And I couldn't see myself being a scientist or an activist. And then I took the sustainability class, which I was hoping would help me kind of figure out my journey. And we read this book called The Merchants of Doubt, that it sort of delved into the role of mass media in obscuring the truth from anything from tobacco and the bad effect of smoking to climate change. So, and I actually will show you a little bit of a, I can't read. I have so many things open here. Okay, so this is a little bit of a small excerpt from a reading. Actually, I took this from a reading from my sophomore year. So that highlight is from when I was a sophomore. But basically, this one chapter was about climate change and how the mass media kind of, for the decades that scientists have known about the existence of climate change, that it is happening, how for the first few decades of that, the mass media kind of helped obscure the reality of climate change. And you know, the authors here call the mass media complicit because they felt obligated to treat these issues as scientific controversies, and they felt constantly pressured to grant the professional deniers of climate change equal status. So they actually reported on climate change with a bias towards skeptics and deniers, and not towards the overwhelming scientific consensus, right? So there's a lot more happening there in that excerpt, but I just remember reading that, and it was so eye-opening. And I think that was a moment when I realized, hey, maybe like my interest in journalism and the media industry can actually have bearing into the climate crisis, right? And I actually can. There's a way to bring those two things together, right? So there's this quote too that I read in a class, and it's a quote by a theologian that I went to Catholic college, so no surprise there. But I just remember it stuck with me, and I feel like it's something that I really held on to as I decided to go into journalism, right? And it's vocation is where one's greatest joys meets the world's greatest need. And I think I realized, especially the last few months, like doing environment journalism truly is like where I find a lot of joy, right? And I think for myself, one of society's greatest needs right now, or the greatest crisis is climate change, right? So I feel like that is where my vocation is. That's where my calling is, right? And like I told Rachel, like I was very burnt out for breaking news. I feel like that wasn't necessarily my niche, my calling, but I do think that this specific these topics of environment are. And for you, that can look different, right? It can be journalism, but what in journalism? Do you want to be telling politics stories, business stories, health stories, you know, justice stories? Would you want to be investigating? I think there's a space there for everyone, right? To find that specific calling as well. A question that I always get from people when I tell them that I went from breaking news to environment journalism is that people always ask me, does it ever get depressing, right? And I tell them, well, I think it was already a little bit depressing for me. I don't think I really enjoy breaking news that much. Um, I don't think reporting on the environment has been as depressing as you might think, right? Like the crisis feels so big sometimes. But when I talk about it, first of all, I learn from people who are doing things, right? Who are taking action. And I think that gives me a lot of hope. And also, I feel like myself writing about it and sharing about it also helps me feel a little bit more in control of my fears, my personal fears about what is happening to the world, right? So, and I think this kind of also goes into, the next 4 years are going to be difficult, especially for climate journalists, right? Like um, our credibility is going to be on the line more so than it has been in the last 4 years. And I think there's going to be, it's going to be more essential than ever, right? That we, as journalists, like keep that fourth estate alive, that to keep the rest of the government in check and balanced, right? So a Trump presidency, like he has promised to, increase production of oil and natural gas, walk back federal regulations on tailpipe emissions, and there's a lot. He just President-elect Trump just chose a Republican representative, former representative of New York, to be his EPA administrator. So there's going to be a lot of movement in that regard. There's a possibility that the EPA is moved out of Washington, D.C. as well. So there's going to be a lot of need for climate journalists, right? And same for other kinds of journalists. But I'm thinking about how in my sphere, how to think about the importance of those roles still. So I did want to show you. So thinking about that excerpt from that book that I was telling you about, The Merchants of Doubt. This front page was in the Tribune. I think it was October. Yeah, it was in October. I wrote that story, and it was when Hurricane Helene was had just reached Florida, and actually not Florida, North Carolina, and it caused a lot of havoc, and especially in mountain communities that were thought of as climate havens, right? Because they were high elevations away from the sea. And I worked on this piece about how the different kinds of weather, extreme weather that we had seen in the Chicago area in the last few years too, can also be attributed to climate change, like the intensity and the reach of Helene. So I didn't choose this headline, actually. It was part of the story, but this was chosen by someone, like by the production designers, and got a lot of hate mail because of this. But I just, when I saw it, I was just wowed. I never would have thought that I would see climate change in such big letters, in the headline of a national newspaper. And not to say that that doesn't happen. Like I've seen it in other papers too, but I do think in the last few years, there has been a shift, a much needed shift that should have happened earlier in the media industry towards, first of all, acknowledging that it's a scientific reality and not just a difference in opinion. But this gives me a lot of hope, honestly, for what the future looks like for the industry. Not just in regards to climate journalism, but journalism that holds power to account and tells it like it is, right? So something I've been thinking about too, and I believe in one of your previous trainings, you talked about this, and it's the fact that everyone is a climate reporter now, right? Just because it's something that touches everything, a lot of aspects of our lives. But I also think that climate reporters are everything reporters, right? I've had to learn how to cover a lot of things that I didn't think I would need to cover, right? Like business and mathematics and science. And it's been a learning curve. But something when I was thinking about these two concepts of everyone being a climate reporter and climate reporters being everything reporters, I realized, climate in this day and age, climate cannot be a second thought to news reporting. And every beat, no matter what you're reporting on, politics, business, health, sports, every beat has some relation to climate because it's the context in which it is taking place, right? And climate relates back to it. So when you're working on something, again, whether or not you're an environment reporter, I would encourage you to think about how does this topic I'm writing about, how does this topic affect climate? And how does climate affect this topic? And when I say climate, I mean climate change specifically, right? But just think about that context. And going back to, I've had to learn a lot of things. And I think one of those things that I was, that really held me back from maybe pursuing environment journalism too strongly at the beginning, right? When I was like, maybe I would like to be doing environment journalism in 5 years. It's because I thought that I wasn't good at science. I never thought of myself as a science person, for example, or an economics person. And it's some things that I've had to learn. But I love science now, and I think it's one of the coolest things that has happened to me since I started doing this job is that I have learned to let go of these limits that I put on myself. I've always told myself I'm a words person. I'm not a science person. That's not true. You can be both things at once because as a journalist, you're a learner too, right? You know how to listen to people and communicate what they're telling you. And honestly, I think the best way for me to know if I'm communicating something well is if I understand it, because I'm not a scientist, right? So if I understand it, once I understand it and I'm able to grasp something, I know I'm going to be able to tell it simply to my readers, right? Most of whom are probably not scientists either. Another thing I was thinking about is that climate touches everyone. And I talked about this with Rachel. This is actually why Rachel reached out to me. She read a story I wrote about how across the political spectrum, Gen Z and millennials across the US either worry or want action when it comes to climate change. So that's a little breakdown there. It's still kind of different across party identification lines, but it's still pretty high if you think about it. And that is really unique to these young groups. Something that this is from a study. Something that this study found too is that it's because young people who have experienced more extreme weather events are going to be likelier to want to see something done about it, regardless of what party they affiliate with. And I think that's something that's very heartening too, especially at times of such deep social divisions and political divisions, right? Because unfortunately, climate change is going to keep intensifying and widening the reach of these events, right? But the upside is that there's an opportunity there that people are going to be more willing to understand what's happening around them, right? What are these events that are touching my life directly? And I think with young people, that's a really big opportunity, right, for engagement. And coming back to that word opportunity that Rachel and I were talking about earlier, for those who heard our little small talk at the beginning. So yeah, okay. And then something else I wanted to tell you is, and I think this goes back to, thinking that when I started and I thought, I'm not a science person, what am I going to do? Is that, especially for science and climate reporters, scientists often are too into their own jargon, into the technicalities of what they know, what they found out, and they need help communicating it in a way that's digestible to the lay people, right? Our readers. So they need journalists, and journalists need scientists too, right? Because I can't just pull out this expertise from the ether. Like I have to have someone to impart that to me. So there are a lot of resources if you are ever working on environment stories or science stories, honestly. And I put some here. I think Rachel's going to be sharing this with you guys later, but these are just incredible resources. And I've actually, there's so many that I actually haven't used them all. I've mostly used Covering Climate Now, which is sort of like a collaborative of journalists that they send out newsletters with tips on how to cover climate change. And they have a Slack channel for climate journalists across the world. They have trainings as well. Then Climate Central, which is sort of a nonprofit for science communicators, they put out reports, like seasonal reports. They offer experts, like in local ideas for different kinds of topics. And then they also have a climate shift index, which is really interesting. It's a map that's updated every day, and it tells you basically how climate change has affected temperatures across the world in a given day. So basically, I should have looked this up today, but like what the weather is today here in Chicago. But so it'll tell you like if temperatures today are twice as likely to have happened, to be as hot as they are because of climate change. It's really interesting. You should check it out. And then there's Sideline, which is a service that helps connect journalists to scientists in a pinch and on deadline. So you basically submit to them a request for, I'm working on this story, I have this deadline, I'm with this media outlet, and they try to match you up with someone. Really helpful. They also have trainings. So I think on this Thursday, there's one about the 101 science reporting. So highly recommend you check that out too. They've helped me find experts who I don't even know, like I don't even know where to start looking, and they're really helpful at that. From anything like climatologists to social scientists. And then there's these other 4 resources I actually have not had the chance to use, and I just learned about a couple of these very recently. But there's a climate concierge at Columbia University. Then there's, which is kind of the same as Climate Central. It kind of offer expertise on climate change topics and environment issues. Science Communication Network, and that's basically more than just environment resources. You reach out to them and they can help you connect with a scientist as well. And then same thing, next expert finding services is 500 women scientists and BIPOC PhDs. So that's also another way to sort of expand the voices, right, and the diversity of expertise that you're getting, and being more intentional about that, right? So this is something too that I want to show you. So these 2 stories I wrote this summer, they were actually kind of based a little bit off of some resources that were shared with me from Climate Central, that nonprofit for science communicators. So they shared with me a study about urban heat and how heat is or temperatures feel even hotter or are even hotter than they would be without a built environment, without buildings and parking lots around it, and how that's worse in big cities like Chicago. And I was able to connect that with some information and some data that came out recently about rising cooling costs in cities like Chicago. And also, I think they are always really good at giving new perspectives. And something that I've learned this year too is that one of the ways in which heat is affecting global warming is manifested is that not only are we breaking record highs, we're also breaking record lows. So very recently in October here in Chicago, we broke a record for how hot the lowest temperature was on, I think it was the end of October. So that's a big deal because when it's hot into the night and it doesn't get too low, below 65 degrees, people's bodies cannot recover from the heat during the day. And that puts more stress on the body. And people who don't have access to AC cannot recover from that heat. And it kind of builds up, right? That stress. So those are two stories that I wrote with help and from these resources. And I learned a lot when I was writing them and reporting. This is another one that I wrote with help from the Climate Central folks. I thought it was a really interesting kind of explainer. I learn a lot about why leaves change color, but also how climate affects that. Or it's a really complex situation. I highly recommend that you go look into it. But we were thinking about how is that going to play out in Illinois specifically, because and people love leaf peeping. So this actually did really well on the website too. Okay. Then something that I also wanted to talk about is contextualizing climate stories, specifically. And I think one of the best pieces of advice that I've gotten about journalism and doing journalism is when you're writing a story, always think about what is this story about, right? Not just about the specific thing you're writing, but also what issue is it? Like what overarching issue are we talking about here? And I think that's how I try to approach my stories. And I always ask myself, how does this story fit into climate change? Right. And not really, I try my best to not fit climate change into the story. I don't try to include it as a second thought, which is what I was talking about earlier, but rather have it in mind as I begin writing, as I begin reporting, right? Know that all things are interconnected. Like I've written a lot about plastic pollution too, and I've learned a lot about how plastic pollution and fossil fuels are interconnected, right? How the production of plastic releases fossil fuels into the atmosphere. And it's something I didn't know about before. Covering Climate Now, which is that collaborative of journalists, also has a really interesting training, and that is available on their website as well. That's called Humanize, Localize, and Solutionize, the three pillars of climate journalism. But I think that is applicable to all different kinds of stories, right? Not just climate stories. When you're writing something, first of all, you always want to bring it home with a human face, relatable stories, right? Something that readers can either see themselves in, a story that they can see themselves in, or that they can empathize with at the very least, right? Also localize. I think that's also a very big challenge for me, is that a lot of what I write, I really try to bring it home to Chicago, to the Midwest, to Illinois. When I started doing environment reporting, I remember at first very naively being like, what even is there to report about on the environment in the Midwest? Like, there must be nothing here. Like, I didn't think about the Great Lakes and the urban wildlife. Like, I wasn't really familiar with a lot of it. And honestly, now I feel like there's not enough time in my week to cover all the different stories about the environment in the Great Lakes in the Midwest in Illinois, which you wouldn't think about as biodiversity hotspots, or when you think about the environment, I feel like we have a very limited understanding of what that means, and myself included. And I keep still learn about how we are relating to how we relate with the place we live in, because we live in the environment, right? Everything around us is or was once nature and is affected by nature. Okay, also something that I've learned as well, and I try to keep this in mind when I'm working, is, avoid platforming climate deniers, right? Because at this point, climate science is not a matter of opinion, it's a fact. But you also have to avoid just repeating greenwashing and PR spins by companies who are trying to look good, make themselves look good. They're just pitching you a story that's gonna give them like good environment points, right? And that also includes being critical about solutions, right? Not necessarily saying nothing's gonna work, we're doomed. Not that, but rather there is a solution. Think about critically. How is this going to play out? Are there people who think it's maybe not the right way, or it's not the only way? And then also follow up on solutions and promises, right? And then, so I think these two stories that I've done, I think I was really, these are probably some of my favorite stories I've done. And I think it's because they're very focused on solutions. But I really tried to be critical when I was writing about them. So The one on the left is about a trial that spread concrete dust on an Illinois farm during the winter, I believe it was, yeah, last year, to basically have the concrete absorb CO2 from the air and sequester it and capture and store it in the ground, which is something that happens. It's a natural geological process, but it takes millions of years to happen. So they're trying to sort of accelerate that process. Really interesting science. I learned a lot. And I ended up having a lot of interesting conversations with people who criticize the carbon credit market. Because the folks here are trying to basically see if they can, well, part of their initial business model was to sell carbon credits to companies so they could still release or emit greenhouse gases, but kind of offset them or neutralize them by buying carbon credits. So I was able to talk with critics of the carbon market, and it was really enlightening, and I think it ended up being a really well-rounded story. And then this other really fun story about invasive carp that are trying to make their way up into the Great Lakes from the Illinois River. So I went downstate to a little village that has had for the last 20 years a fishing competition to catch or net the invasive carp because they feel like things like not enough is being done by the state to sort of stop their or slow down their migration upstream. And then use that kind of as a launch pad to delve into other solutions and other ways that scientists and the state are trying to solve the invasive carp problem here in Illinois, because they're coming out of the Illinois River, and if they reach Lake Michigan, they could wreak havoc on the ecosystems because they're not native species. Okay, I'm almost done, I promise. This is just a little bit of advice. Well, first of all, you never know when you'll bump into stories. So if you can, always have business cards on you. I have business cards in every purse and backpack I own. And if you don't have business cards, and just carry paper and a pen with you. And then, if you're like out at dinner and then suddenly you hear something from the waiter and like they come, you can write your contact information. And I think it really is, it's a good practice just to be able to connect with people that way, even when you're not working. That being said, if you can, separate your work and your life, because I feel like you really have to prioritize that and in order to hang on and not burn out too fast, right? As long as it's reasonably possible, log off your professional or work email on the weekends after hours. I have a work phone. I don't look at it after I'm done with work unless there are extenuating circumstances, like I'm working on a story and I'm waiting for edits or something like that. Also, I think climate reporting is very unique. I don't see the climate journalism world as a competition necessarily, or as competitive as other beats might be, because I feel like everyone is trying to address this climate crisis, right? And there needs to be a lot of collaboration. So give credit where it's due. If you got inspiration from another story or another outlet, link to it. I think that really fosters good connections as well that are worth having in the industry. Getting started will always be a learning curve. Don't feel discouraged. You're also never going to make everyone happy, no matter what you do, no matter if you cover the least controversial topics. Not everyone's always going to be happy with you. So decide whose opinion matters to you. And I'll speak on that a little bit more in a second. Also, if you wonder if you're making an impact, you're on the right track. It means you care about the job that you're doing. And I think there's that is very necessary for this kind of work. Set yourself apart too with your writing style, your skills, your, what languages you can speak. Find something that you can, that makes you unique and that has sort of resonated with others, that you've realized that you can sort of make the most of, right? And you make yourself reliable. I think when people know that you're reliable, that really goes a long way, because then that means good work references, but also you get a lot of really good political capital in the newsroom, right? Like, people know that they can go to you for help, for when they're in a pinch, when they need a story written really fast, etc. So this is a letter to the editor, kind of going back to decide whose opinion matters. When I started doing climate reporting, sometimes I get really weird hate mail when it comes to science. I think people can be really, it's not necessarily as controversial a topic as others, or as incendiary a topic as other topics currently, like immigration, etc. But some people really, it doesn't mean that I don't get hate mail, for example, right? But what I really care about, and what I've noticed with this kind of work that I'm doing on environment journalism, is that sometimes readers write letters to the editor about the stories I've written. Like this person who wrote about a story that I did on Great Lakes plastic litter. And to me, that means that someone has engaged meaningfully with what I wrote, that they cared about it enough, or they thought about it enough, that they took time out of their day to write about it and send that to the newspaper, right? So seeing when people write letters to the editor about stories I've written, that really means so much more to me than any kind of email that I can get that's just, shot really quickly from a cell phone, that with, very superficial thoughts about what I just wrote, right? And then this is a photo of a lady that a year ago, I wrote a story about heat, and she didn't have AC in her public housing apartment. And after writing the story, actually the public housing authority here in Chicago reached out to her and got her a portable AC unit. And I've had that sort of thing happen in a couple stories that I've written about heat. And to me, that means I've had an impact on someone's life, right? And it means that they'll be safe and comfortable during a really bad heat wave, for example. Okay, and then there's some reading suggestions here. Hopefully, Rachel and Sydney can share these with you as well. Some blogs, and also some reporting that I think is really unique and nuanced, and might give you different ideas of what climate reporting can look like. Yeah, that is it for me. That's my email. If you guys want to write it down, it's adperez@chicagotribune.com. And I think we have some time, right, Rachel? Like 15 minutes for.
We do.
Yeah.
But before we get to that, I just have to thank you for this presentation. I think before we began the session, you and I were also talking about this issue of leveraging this moment and really trying to stay positive in a moment of challenge. And you have really, really, the thoughts you put into this presentation and the message you wanted to share with the fellows just resonated with me so much. I've been in the business 100 years now, but hearing you talk about some of your strategies in this moment, very powerful. So I need to jump in and thank you for that. Do I see any Zoom hands? Does anyone have a question that they want to ask Adriana? If not, I want to jump in and touch on the issue of building sources. I really appreciated that you said, obviously we should steer clear of climate deniers, because at this point there's really anybody who doesn't want to believe in it is willfully trying to ignore the obvious. But when it comes to building your sources, deciding, how many community meetings or town halls or research finding announcements that you're going to attend. How do you manage your time and decide, which of these I'm going to attend and which I'm not?
That is a great question. I feel like I think I said this, it's really hard because I think there's so many, even just so many topics, environmental topics to cover in the region and the city, and it's really hard to choose and prioritize that as well. Um, I think when I'm approaching a story and I'm kind of balancing how many people to talk to, how many meetings to attend, etc., how much research to do. Um, I mean, if I had it my way, I would just dedicate a whole month to one story, but obviously I have a specific kind of pace that I've set with my editor. I think something that has really helped me is to think ahead. What is my editor going to want to know? Is she going to have any questions? Right. And I think anticipating that has really helped me sort of focus who I'm talking to. And I try to approach a topic from different perspectives. So yeah, even if I recommend not reaching out to climate deniers, right? Because um that's not necessarily an opinion, right? A difference in opinion. But I believe there's still different perspectives in how to address something. On different kinds of expertise that people can bring to the table. So I just did a story about an oil pipeline that crosses from Wisconsin through the Great Lakes and into Canada. Well, it starts in Canada, but it goes through the US and back into Canada. It's called Line 5, and it's a big issue. And there's years and years, decades of history there. And it was the first time that we've extensively covered Line 5 in the Tribune. Um, and so we had to give a lot of context, right? But I really try to hone down on the perspectives of the people that have been most affected. So that is the indigenous community at the Wisconsin reservation where the pipeline has been since the 70 years it was built. And then also the folks that, folks that can speak, folks in Chicago, right, that might not have a specific physical connection to the pipeline, which is still far away, but who drank water from the Great Lakes, right? So a spill from that pipeline would have repercussions into my community, into the community that I'm writing for, right? And then also talk to someone about the policy aspects of what would a Harris or a Trump presidency have meant for the future of this pipeline. So I think just trying to get to what are the different perspectives, the different people affected, or the different players at hand, and then it is a game of prioritizing, but also, like I said, putting myself in the shoes of my editor and thinking, what is she going to ask me about? What is she going to want to know? I think that has been the most helpful so far.
I see Aditi has her Zoom hand raised. So introduce yourself and ask your question.
Hi, sorry. First of all, can you hear me properly? And do you hear any disturbance?
Yes, we can hear you. It's fine.
Okay. Okay, great. Hi, I'm Aditi. I work as a breaking news writer for CNN. I'm so happy that you gave this talk because I'd also love to know how you made that transition from breaking news to this beat is something I'm interested in doing as
Mm.
well. So I'd love to hear that. And if I could just tag on a second question. Uh, a lot of climate stories I've done have been very gloom and doom, as you mentioned, not just hurricanes or COP, but also like a story about how the beauty industry is failing its climate ambitions and such. So um, some readers reached out to me saying it made them so anxious thinking about all the bottles they use and things like that, right? So I'm wondering if you have any advice on how to write centering solutions, not problems, which may end up making us feel like we're sitting in the middle of this large planet-wide fire. Um, yeah, just like solutions journalism, what chunk of it, etc.
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, okay, well, so first thing about my transition, I think and I this was a piece of advice, but I also think it relates to what happened to me. It was still a learning curve to go from covering breaking news to covering environment. It was a different pace, different kind of people that you have to talk to for the most part. So it was not starting from zero necessarily because I had the reporting skills, and I think that's good to know, right? You're not starting from zero. You have experience, you're learning and you're you understand the industry, and I think that's basic and that's going to help you launch into whatever kind of journalism you want to do. But just start kind of trying to read and learn as much as you can about how a specific topic is playing out in your area. I don't know if you a DTR specifically like CNN, like national or somewhere specific. I don't know if you're based out of somewhere, but basically just I think just getting really familiar with what is newsworthy, right? And what are issues that maybe have not been covered as well before, either by the industry or by your own outlet. And I think going to your solutions question, I think that's really important. I think finding new angles, interesting angles, solution angles was also a learning curve. I think it was a matter of time and finding a pace. But when it comes to finding solutions or thinking about solutions, honestly, the best kind of advice I can give you is, I think as with any story, journalism, you have to talk, there has to be conflict, there has to be a problem, right? So you're probably going to start off with a problem. But I think you can ask people who are involved, for example, I can ask people who are involved in the environment advocacy sphere here in Chicago in the Midwest, what is being done to address this specific issue I've found? They're the people who will be most familiar. So don't be shy about asking around. You're not going to know anything of the get-go. And I think, I wrote about climate anxiety specifically, since you mentioned that, Aditi. I wrote about climate anxiety last year, but not just about climate anxiety, but about climate cafes, which are just these sort of group therapy meetings for people to discuss how the climate crisis is affecting them emotionally, mentally, and kind of share those experiences so they can feel less alone. So I think that was a really, sorry, that wasn't great. Yeah. So I think just start with it's okay if you start with a problem, but just don't stay there. If you want to infuse some interest in the story, and a different approach to the usual doom and gloom, like just ask around, like try to and read other outlets and see what they've been covering, right? And how a solution being taken up in a different state can be localized to where you are. So that's some advice. I think someone was on the chat. I'm sorry if I missed that.
Our Lily wants to ask the next question, so please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Lily. I'm a photojournalist at the Des Moines Register, so I cover everything. When you were going through your slides and you pulled up that story about the invasive carp, the photo that was on that John J. Kim photo of the guy trying to like control the carp, really made me laugh. And so it made me think, because a lot of the people that we talk to on here are people who don't work at like legacy news that has a staff of photojournalists as fantastic as the Tribune does. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you engage with them to be able to make great photos like that one.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. I think like working on the environment, honestly, I feel like a lot of these photos just make themselves, like I feel like I don't really have to look really hard, because a lot of these stories are just really visual already. You're thinking about the environment, you're thinking about trees, the lake, the fish, I think what's hard sometimes is trying to find like real people, right? To kind of reach or get to that aspect of humanizing a story. So when possible, I do try to think about, okay, well, who are the people in this and how can we involve them in the story, in the visuals, right? But I don't know, I feel like I've had a lot of really uh fun experiences being able to do environment reporting, and a lot of them, like a lot of photographers that I end up working with do a lot of what's it called, like drone photography, because I'm either writing about, the river, a dam, or I'm writing about like fires, so they take a photo of a forest fire or something like that. So but I think it's definitely something that I try to do and that's been ingrained in me since I started, even as a breaking news reporter at the Tribune, to just always think about the visuals, like how are we telling this? I'm telling the story with my words, but I also need to help the photojournalists like tell it with visuals, right? With a photo, with what they are good at doing. So it's very collaborative. I always try to talk with them through, what the story's about, and also what I am. I try to go places firsthand, right? See something sort of uh, with my own eyes, going to this fishing tournament in Southern Illinois, and bring that photographer with me. So every time I try to go see something firsthand, is there on my mind. So I think having both the opportunity, like giving them too the opportunity to see things with their own eyes and with their camera is really important. So it's very collaborative.
We have one more. I think we have time for one more, and that is from Ambar. Ambar, are you still on? Can you ask the question?
Yes. Thanks so much for talking with us. Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on Lily's question and also a bit of Rachel's question in terms of cultivating sources and also story finding, and especially with those fun stories. You just mentioned how much of it was like already having those relationships with the sources cultivated, or how much was also like in that page where you mentioned like all those resources, like you kind of subscribing or like watching what's going on with some of this like research, or because I think one was like a trial they had done. Yeah, so how much of it is like,
Yeah. I feel like it's the stories are going to come at you from very different places, right? You're going to have people in your inbox pitching you stories that do not make any sense for what you cover, and you're going to get more often than not, a lot of the pitches you're getting are not related to what you cover, are not newsworthy, etc. But there are gems, and that trial of the concrete dust being, put in that farm field, that was someone reaching out to us to tell us about it. And it's an Irish company, so we were the first local media that they reached out to. So it's kind of an exclusive, because I don't know that they reached out to anyone else, or they knew to reach out to anyone else. So we got lucky in that respect. About the carp story, I didn't know about this tournament, which had been happening for 20 years. My editor did, and she'd been wanting to write about it for a while. So it's often a kind of a mix of people pitching me, my editor pitching me, and more like assigning me, but I think it's a way that it's very collaborative. And then me kind of pitching her too, just things that I'm seeing at other outlets. I always try to think about what's happening, it's fall right now. What are people wanting to know? When leaves change color, why they change color, how climate change is affecting that, right? Last year, I wrote about how pumpkins, when they're thrown into the landfills, they release methane because they don't break down properly. So there's all these events in Illinois about where you can go and bring your pumpkins and smash them and then send them to a composting facility. So I went to one of those, and it was a really fun experience. But I was just thinking, okay, after Halloween, what do people do with their pumpkins? So I think always thinking about, okay, what's happening? Like, what's the next holiday? What's the next, season? Like, what questions do I have? And how can we approach it in a way that people might not have thought about before? How can I learn something new, and how can others learn from that too?
thank you.
Yeah.
We are at the end of our time, but I have to share with you, Adriana, that the depth of wisdom and insight you have imparted to us has been tremendous. And it boils down to one thing that you said that I sometimes find we have so much of a hard time remembering. And that is, this industry is about us being parachuted into all different kinds of topics at any moment. And even when you're a trending reporter and you're feeling like you're burning out and it's just too much, the fact that you have been able to jump into a new topic every day and turn out a story and then tomorrow move on to something completely different, learn about it, grasp it, and then be able to produce that story. We have the tools that we need, and you are an incredibly strong example of that aspect of our industry. So I have to just doubly thank you for joining us to show us the opportunity to leverage our strengths in climate reporting. It's been a very, very powerful session. So thank you so much for joining the Widening family.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. You're so kind, and thank you everyone for being here. I really appreciate it. My email is, you can ask Rachel for it, so you can reach out to me after too.
Trust me, we always put people's contacts on our program, so you'll be bugged quite often, I'm sure, by your colleagues here who really got as much out of this as I did. So thank you.
Awesome. Of course. Thank you.
All right.
Take
We'll
care,
be in
everyone.
touch. Take care.